Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidil Mursaleen. Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa ashabihi at-tayyibin at-tahirin. I bear witness that no one deserves to be worshipped except Allah Ta'ala, the one who has no partner and no similar, the one who has no length and no width and no depth and no perimeter, the one who is not a volume and is not in a place. And how could he be in a place when he existed before time and space? He created everything except himself, including you and your actions. Nothing occurs except by his will, both good and bad, he destined to happen. He speaks without sound, letter, or language, not Arabic, Hebrew, nor Korean. He's not light, he's not a spirit, he has nothing in common with human beings. He's not in the direction of up, down, right, left, front, nor back. And whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different than that. And I bear witness that our noble, unrivaled Master Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is the slave of Allah, his final messenger, and the best of all of God's creations. May Allah unite us with him in paradise and grant us a drink from his basin. And may Allah increase us in patience, humility, knowledge, and comprehension, and help us put our knowledge into practice and grant us all sincere intentions. Ameen. Ameen. We are continuing in the book, the Hadrami Introduction, Al-Muqaddimah Al-Hadramiyya, which is a beginner's level text in Shafi'i fiqh, written by the Allama Bafadl, rahimahullah. We've made it to page 27 at the bottom of the page. Page 27 at the bottom of the page. It's at the bottom of page 27. It starts a new section entitled The Description of the Salah. So in this chapter, inshallah, starting today, we're going to begin talking about how to make salah. And we start, of course, with the obligatory aspects of it, which are called the arkan, or the pillars, or the integrals, or the furud, or the obligations. There's lots of terms that we use for these things, but these are the essential elements of the salat. Okay, what are the parts of the salat which, if you fail to do them correctly, then your salat is going to be invalid? This is what we're talking about, the absolutely essential, obligatory aspects of the salat. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said, its pillars are 13. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, said, its pillars are 13. Those of you who have studied some other books of Shafi'i fiqh know that 13 is not the strong saying in the madhab. So this book says 13. Excuse me for one moment. Assalamu alaikum. The strong saying in the madhab is that there are 17 integrals to the salat. This book says 13. And you'll see, inshallah, I'm going to explain the difference here. The difference between these sayings is very slight. You'll find that some books of the madhab say 13, some books say 14, some books say 17, and some books say 18 integrals of salat. So let's talk first, before we read through the book, let's just mention, according to the strongest saying, the 17 integrals of salat. They are the intention. Excuse me, please, for one moment. I'm sorry about that. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. So I was saying that the various books in the Shafi'i school, some will say there are 13 integrals, some will say there are 14, some will say there are 17, some will say there are 18. Of these sayings, the strongest one is the 17 saying. So let's talk through real quick. We'll mention what the 17 integrals of the salat are. First is the intention. The second integral is the opening takbir. The third integral is to stand if you're able to. The fourth integral is to recite Surah Al-Fatiha. The fifth integral is to make ruku'. The sixth is to be still while in ruku'. The seventh is to make i'tidal. The eighth is to be still while in i'tidal. The ninth is to make sujood twice. The 10th is to be still while in sujood. The 11th is to sit between your two sujoods. And the 12th is to be still while sitting between the two sujoods. The 13th integral is to sit at the end of the salat for the purposes of saying the final tashahhud, the salat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the closing salam. The 14th integral is to actually say the final tashahhud. The 15th is to actually say the salat upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The 16th is to actually say the closing salam. And the 17th and final integral is the order that you must perform the other 16 integrals in the proper order. The strong saying of the madhab is that those 17 are the integrals of the salat. Some books will say 18 integrals, such as Metin Abi Shuja. Those of you who have taken Abu Shuja, mashallah, beautiful book. He mentions in there that there are 18 integrals of salat. He counts all of the 17 I just mentioned, but he adds an integral that you need to have the intention of exiting the salat when you finish. And this is a weak saying. Okay, according to the strong saying, you don't need to intend to exit the salat. So 17 is the correct number. And if you look closely at these 17 integrals, you'll see that 4 of the integrals are to remain still in some of the positions. There's stillness while in ruku', stillness while in i'tidal, stillness while in sujood, and stillness while sitting between the two sujoods. These 4 integrals, some scholars, instead of counting them as 4 separate integrals, count them as just one integral. And that's how you end up with 14. Okay, what was 4 becomes just 1. So the number goes down by 3. So some books will say 14 integrals because they just say one integral, to be still in ruku' and i'tidal and in sujood and sitting between the sujoods. So the ones who say 14, they're not really disagreeing with the ones who say 17 in terms of how to perform the salat. They're just counting it differently. Similarly, the ones that say 13 also are not disagreeing with the ones who say 14 and the ones that say 17. They're counting it differently. The ones who say 13 integrals, such as this book, which we're doing right now, they don't mention stillness at all. They consider stillness to be like part of the ruku'. So there's an integral to make ruku', and according to the strong saying, it's a separate integral to be still while in ruku'. The ones who say 13, they just say the stillness is part of the ruku'. So saying make ruku' includes within it the stillness, because the stillness is like an essential attribute of the ruku', and the i'tidal and the sujood and the sitting between the sujoods. So it's just differences in how to count them. There are no differences in terms of what's actually required for your salat to be valid, except the ones that say 18. For them, that's a true difference. But the ones who say 13, 14, and 17 are agreeing. They are agreeing. Insha'Allah, that's clear. So let's read what the author says. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says its pillars are 13. Number 1, the intention within the heart. So the first of the pillars is the intention. Okay, and it's important to note that the place where the intention resides is in your heart. It's not on your tongue. Okay, so the intention, although it's perfectly fine for you to say it with your tongue, and in fact, it's even recommended, it's sunnah for you to say your intention with your tongue loudly enough that you can hear yourself. The tongue is not where the intention resides. It's in your heart. So if you say your intention with your tongue, but in your heart, you're like not even paying attention to what you're saying, then you didn't make an intention. Okay, the tongue by itself is not sufficient. However, the heart by itself is sufficient. Even if you don't say it with the tongue, as long as the intention is in the heart, then the intention is there. I'm also going to mention here, before we get into some of the details, that the intention is not a specific sentence. It's not a set of words that you need to think in a certain order. Rather, the intention is, it's in the heart. Okay, it's sometimes I like to say that the intention is knowing what you're doing and why you're doing it. Okay, if in your heart you know which action you're starting, that you're starting a salat, and you know which salat you're praying, and you know why you're doing that salat, then the intention is there, whether you thought a specific sentence or did not think a specific sentence. Okay? But the intention is the first integral, and it resides in the heart. He says it is enough in the undesignated voluntary prayer. So the salats are of different types. There are some salats which are obligatory. And there are some salats which are optional or voluntary, as he calls it. Okay? Some of these salats need to be designated. Okay? Because some salats have specific times, such as the 5 obligatory salats, they have times in which they need to be done. Some of the sunnah salats also have specific times, like the Eid salat has a time. Okay, or the salat al-duha has a time. Salat al-witr, salat al-tarawih. These salats have times in which they need to be done. Other sunnah salats have causes or reasons for praying them. So they don't have a specific time, but there's a specific cause for why you're doing it. Okay, examples of that would be like the eclipse salat. You pray it because there's an eclipse occurring. Or like greeting the masjid. You're praying that because you walked into the masjid. Or the sunnah of wudu. After you make wudu, it's sunnah to pray 2 rak'ahs. So in this case, you're praying those 2 rak'ahs because you made wudu. Some sunnah rak'ahs have causes. Some salats have times, including obligatory ones as well as sunnah ones. But there's some salats that don't have a time and they don't have a cause either. They don't have a time and they don't have a cause either. These ones are called undesignated voluntary salats. Okay, they're called undesignated voluntary salats. This is a salat you do just because you feel like worshiping your Lord. It's not one of the ones that has a special time or special cause. You just feel like being in salat, so you make a salat. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says, for these kind of salats, undesignated salats, okay, he's saying it's enough just to have the intention of performing salat. Okay, let's read it. It's a little bit confusing because he's going to give some examples, but inshallah it'll be clear. He says, it is enough in the undesignated voluntary prayer, the undesignated voluntary prayer. So we're talking about a salat where you did not designate a time for that prayer, nor did you designate a cause for that prayer. Then he says, like the salutation of the masjid and the sunnah of wudu. If you just read this sentence as it is, you would think that he's saying greeting the masjid and the sunnah of wudu count as undesignated voluntary prayers, but that's not the case. All right, greeting the masjid is a salat that has a cause. It's not undesignated. The sunnah of wudu is a salat that has a cause. It's not undesignated. Rather, what the author is saying is, if you begin a salat that has no time or no cause, a truly undesignated salat, the only thing you need to intend is just one thing, which is you intend that you're making salat. And if you were to pray 2 rak'ahs to greet the masjid, which is a salat that has a cause, but you didn't designate in your intention. In your intention, you walked into the masjid and prayed 2 rak'ahs, but you didn't intend for those 2 rak'ahs to be the greeting of the masjid. You didn't designate it for that reason. You just went in and you prayed 2 rak'ahs. In this case, those 2 rak'ahs will count as an undesignated voluntary prayer because you didn't in your heart specify that the 2 rak'ahs that you're doing are because you entered the masjid. You just entered in and prayed. You didn't in your intention intend for it to be the greeting of the masjid. So therefore, it's not the greeting of the masjid. Our Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Innamal a'malu bin niyat." All right, these deeds are according to the intention. If you didn't intend for it to be the greeting of the masjid, it's not going to be the greeting of the masjid. And since you didn't intend any particular time or cause, it's going to be an undesignated voluntary salat. So it'll still be valid. Okay, your intention is valid because you intended to pray. You intended to make salat. But because you failed to designate any time or any cause, this valid salat will be valid as an undesignated voluntary salat, which gets less reward than the salats that have times and causes. Same with sunnah of wudu. If you made wudu and then you prayed 2 rak'ahs, but in your intention you did not specify that those 2 rak'ahs are because you made wudu. In fact, you didn't specify any time or any cause. Well, then those 2 rak'ahs will be valid, but they'll be valid as undesignated voluntary salats, which are good salats and they're rewardable, but their reward is not the same as the reward of the salats that have times and causes. I'm going to read the sentence again. He says, it is enough in the undesignated voluntary prayer, like the salutation of the masjid and the sunnah of wudu, to have the intention of doing the salah. So if you're praying a salat that doesn't have a time or a cause, you simply intend that you're performing salat. If you prayed a salat that does have a time or a cause, but in your intention you did not designate what the time or cause is, well then your prayer is still valid, but it's valid as an undesignated prayer, not as one with a designated time or cause. Let's continue. He says, may Allah have mercy on him. With regards to the salah that is set by time, it says here, and has a reason. The translation should be, with regards to the salah that is set by time, and the one that has a reason. He's talking about 2 different types. Like this wording here, it makes it sound like he's talking about a salat that has a time and a reason. That's not what the Arabic text is saying. It's saying, as for a salat that has a time, and as for a salat that has a reason, the rule is different. For these salats, it's not sufficient for you simply to intend to perform salat. What do you need to intend in these cases? It says, then the intentions of doing the salah and he says here to appoint the type of salah, like sunnah of dhuhr or Eid al-Fitr or al-Adha. What is he trying to say here? He's saying that if the salat you're praying has a time or it has a cause, then you need to intend two things. You need to intend that you're performing salat, and you also need to specify what the time or the cause is for that salat. So one thing that I find a little bit confusing here is he translates one word as appoint. Like you have to appoint something, but on the previous page he said undesignated. I think if he would have said designated instead of appoint, it would have been more clear, but you get the idea. Appoint it's fine. He's saying here that if you're performing a salat and this salat has a time, then in your intention, you have to intend to perform salat and intend and like specify, designate the time that that salat has or the cause that that salat has. Now, my translation contains, after the word appoint, it contains the words, the type of salah. That phrase, the type of salah, is not present in the Arabic text. The translator added that because, or probably because he thought it would make it more clear. And perhaps it does for some people. But I think it would have been more clear if instead of using the word type, because it's not the type of salat that you're designating the time or the cause, which is the whole subject here. We're saying with regards to the salat that is set by a time, meaning it has a time when it's supposed to be done, and in regard to the salat that has a reason, meaning there's a cause for the salat, then when in your intention, you need to intend to perform salat and you need to specify, you need to designate the time for that salat if it has a time, or the cause for that salat if it has a cause. And he gives examples. He says like sunnah of dhuhr. See, the sunnah of dhuhr has a time, right? Those 2 rak'ahs that you pray before dhuhr or the 2 rak'ahs you pray after dhuhr, for example, these rak'ahs have a time. They're sunnah salats, but they need to be prayed when? During dhuhr time. So they have a time, just like the obligatory dhuhr has a time. And in fact, the obligatory dhuhr and the sunnahs of dhuhr have the same time. So the time window during which you pray obligatory dhuhr is the same window during which you pray the sunnahs of dhuhr. So if you want to pray a sunnah of dhuhr, your intention must include at a minimum 2 things. Must include that you're intending to begin a salat, and it must include that the salat you're intending to begin is one whose time is dhuhr time. So you're specifying which time this salat is designated for. It says, or Eid al-Fitr. That's another example. If you want to pray Eid al-Fitr, it's going to require at a minimum that you intend 2 things. You're going to have to intend that you're performing salat, and you're going to have to intend the time for that salat, which in this case is the Eid. So this salat is for Eid al-Fitr. So you specify that you're praying the Eid salat. It says, or al-Adha. So if it's Eid al-Adha, again, you would have to specify at a minimum 2 things. That you intend to pray salat, and you specify the time for that salat. Now these 2 examples, dhuhr and also the 2 Eid prayers, these examples are all examples of salats that have times. But you could also give an example of a salat that has a cause, such as the rain prayer. Okay, if there's a drought and you need rain, You pray the sunnah salat known as salat al-istisqa. We'll get to it in a few chapters. Um, for that salat, you must intend at a minimum that you're going to perform salat, and you specify the cause for the salat. In this case, the cause is the drought. Okay, the cause is this need for rain, that you're begging for rain. Okay, that cause is the reason why you're making the salat. So in your intention, you have to intend that you're doing the salat for that reason. Please drop a note in the comments, inshallah, if you have a question. Some of this stuff about intentions can get confusing. So far we talked about the salat that has no time and no cause, which we called undesignated voluntary salat. For those prayers, what do you have to intend? Just one thing, that you're performing salat. But if the salat you're performing has a time, or if it has a cause, then your intention must include two things: the performance of salat, and you must designate the time that's associated with that prayer or the cause that's associated with that prayer. What does he say now? He says, with regards to the compulsory prayer, meaning the obligatory prayer, there's now going to be three things you have to intend for the obligatory salat. He says, with regards to the compulsory prayer, the intention of doing the salat, that's the first thing you have to intend. And the appointment of it, meaning you must designate the time of it, because the obligatory salats all have times. So you specify the time for your salat. For example, the morning prayer. All right, if you want to pray subh, then you're going to intend that you pray obligatory subh. So you're going to intend that you're performing salat, the prayer, and you're going to specify the time for it, which is subh time. It says, or other than this, because maybe subh isn't the one you're praying. Maybe you're praying dhuhr or asr or maghrib or isha. Okay, you specify the time of that salat. It says, and also the intention of it being obligatory. Okay, so because these 5 daily salats are obligatory for you to perform, you must also intend that you're fulfilling that obligation. Okay, so you intend that you're praying obligatory subh. You're praying obligatory subh. 3 things. Okay, if you left out the intention of it being obligatory, well, then those 2 rakahs would count as 2 sunnah rakahs. Right? Isn't it sunnah to pray 2 rakahs before subh? The 2 rakahs that are not obligatory, the 2 sunnah rakahs, what would you intend for those 2? You would intend that you're praying subh. Okay, at a minimum, you would have to intend that you're praying subh. You intended that you're performing the salat, and you specified the time for that salat, which is subh time. But you did not intend to fulfill an obligation, which means, therefore, you're praying a sunnah salat. Most Muslims, if they're praying a sunnah salat, they intend in their heart that it's sunnah, because people find it confusing to intend to pray subh when you're actually praying the sunnah salat. They find that strange. So they kind of get in the habit of intending that it's obligatory when it's obligatory, and intending that it's sunnah when it's not obligatory. So to pray the obligatory subh, they would intend, for example, I pray obligatory subh. And when they want to pray the sunnah rakahs that come before it, they say, in their intention, they say, I pray the sunnah of subh. This is how most Muslims do it, and that's perfectly fine. But you actually don't need to specify in your intention if a salat is sunnah. You don't have to specify that. Rather, you have to specify if the salat is obligatory. That's when it needs to be specified. Then he says, for the adolescent or the one who has passed adolescence. That's an awful long translation for what's one word in Arabic. Lil balid. He means for the pubescent one, the one who's reached puberty. Instead of simply saying for the one who has reached puberty, he said for the adolescent or the one who has passed adolescence. It's enough to just say the one who has reached puberty. That includes whether you're still in puberty or whether you reached it in the past. Okay, but it's essentially saying if Islamically you're considered to be an adult, well, then you must intend that your salats are obligatory if they're obligatory. Because only adults are obligated to pray them. Inshallah, we know from other lessons that when it comes to children, children are not obligated to do anything according to the Sharia because they're children. They're not accountable. They're not mukallaf. Rather, it's an obligation upon the guardians, like the parents or whichever adults are caring for the children. It's an obligation upon them to order the children to make salat after they reach 7 years of age, and to order them in such a way that the children understand the importance of salat, that the children don't miss it. You order them to make up a salat if they didn't pray it. You treat them as if they're adults, but technically they're not obligated to perform those salats. Okay, but once they hit puberty, then Islamically they're considered adults. Those obligations come upon their necks. Okay, so if you have reached puberty, then you're in that situation where you must intend that the salat is obligatory if you're praying an obligatory salat. I'm going to pause here for a second and repeat what I said. There are some types of salats where you only have to intend one thing. There are some types of salats where you have to intend two things. And there are some types of salats where you have to intend three things. The ones where you have to intend three things are the obligatory salats. You're going to intend that you're starting a salat, like your intention is to perform salat, and you're going to state the time of that salat, like Dhuhr, Asr, Maghrib, Isha, or Subh. And you're going to intend that this salat you're starting is an obligatory one. You're going to intend three things for the obligatory salats. Now, if you're praying a sunnah salat, that has a time or that has a cause, then you're only going to intend what? Two things. You're going to intend that you're performing a salat, and you're going to specify in your intention the time for that salat or the cause for it. All right, which basically means you're specifying which salat you're praying. That's how we identify the salats, by intending the time or the cause. So these kind of sunnah salats that have times and causes, you're going to intend two things: the performance of salat as well as the time or the cause. Now, if you're praying a salat that's sunnah and it does not have a time, nor does it have a cause, well, then the only thing you're going to intend, therefore, is just that you're performing salat. And your salat will be valid. Okay? Inshallah, that's understood. But know that the obligatory salats are more rewardable than the sunnah salats. And the sunnah salats have different ranks. The best of the sunnah salats are the ones that we pray in congregation, the two Eids, the two eclipses, and the rain prayer. After that, the best of the salats would be witr, followed by the two rakahs before subh, followed by the rakahs that come before or after the other obligatory salats, followed by, there's other ranks, and the lowest rank of the sunnah salats is the one that has no time and no cause. That's the lowest rank. Okay, so make sure, mashallah, in your intentions that you specify the time or the cause, because if you don't, then your salat is going to count as a salat that has like just a undesignated salat. which is going to be of lower rank than the others. Again, if you have questions, pop them in the box. Next, the author, may Allah have mercy on him, he's going to start mentioning some of the things that are not required in your intention, but it is recommended for you to put them in your intention. So he says, may Allah have mercy on him, it is recommended to mention the number of units, the number of rak'ahs. Okay, you don't have to specify how many rak'ahs when you make your intention. All right, if you're praying Asr, right, the obligatory Asr, you can simply say, I pray obligatory Asr. That's what's required. But it's recommended to say, I pray obligatory Asr 4 rak'ahs. It's recommended to intend the number of rak'ahs. It says to attribute it to Allah, meaning you also intend lillahi ta'ala, that you're praying these rak'ahs for what? Out of service to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not required for you to intend lillahi ta'ala, but you should. Okay, so a better intention would be, I pray obligatory Asr 4 rak'ahs lillahi ta'ala. It says, and to mention whether it is being done, he says present. What he means by present is on time, or being done as a makeup salah. Okay, is your salat on time, or are you making up one that you missed? This also is not required in your intention. Okay, if you're praying obligatory dhuhr from 8 years ago, you can simply say, I pray obligatory dhuhr. In your intention, that's enough. Okay, but if it's a makeup, if it's not the obligatory dhuhr that's due right now, okay, imagine that it's a dhuhr time right now. If it's not the one that's due right now, then it's useful for you to go ahead and add in your intention that it's a makeup. So you might intend, for example, to pray obligatory Asr 4 rak'ahs lillahi ta'ala as a makeup, or maybe say I pray a makeup of obligatory Asr 4 rak'ahs lillahi ta'ala, something like that. That might be an easier sequence to think it in. Although I'm going to remind you that you don't have to think these words in any particular sequence. You don't even have to think words at all, because the place of the intention is in the heart, not on the tongue. Okay, so those are some recommended things to intend that you don't have to intend. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, then says, it is compulsory to make the intention simultaneous with the takbirah. Yeah. So we're still talking right now about the first of the pillars of the salat. The first pillar is what? The intention. We've talked about what you need to intend and what's recommended to intend and how that changes depending on which salat you're actually intending to do. We talked about all of that. Now we're talking about when. When do you make this intention? Okay, it is compulsory, meaning it's obligatory for your salat to be valid. You must have this intention in your heart while you're saying the opening takbir. That's what's meant by takbirah here. Takbirah just means a takbir. Right, one takbir is called in Arabic takbirah. That AH at the end indicates we're talking about one takbir. But which is the one takbir we're talking about? The one that begins the salat, the opening takbir. All right, we begin a salat by saying what? Allahu Akbar. While you're saying Allahu Akbar, that's when the intention has to be in your heart. All right, if you finish saying the takbir, if you say that R at the end of the takbir, and the intention was not in your heart at any point while you were saying the takbir, And that means your salat does not actually begin. You haven't entered salat. Okay, you haven't entered salat if your intention was not present in your heart when you're saying the takbir. This is why it's definitely recommended for you to say your takbir, to say your intention with your tongue before you say the takbir. Say it. It doesn't have to be loud for everybody to hear it, but just say, I pray obligatory Asr Salat 4 rakas lillahi ta'ala. Say it with your tongue before you say your takbir, because what this does is it helps you focus mentally on what you're about to do, and it helps your intention to be present in your heart when you say the takbir. Insha'Allah ta'ala, it is a good practice to say your takbir with your tongue. But what's required is for it to be in the heart while you're saying, I think I just said the wrong thing. It's recommended for you to say your intention with your tongue, but what's required is for the intention to be in your heart while you're saying the takbir. Okay. Number 2, all of that is number 1, the first of the 13 integrals that he's going to mention here, although, like we talked about earlier, the strong opinion is that there are 17. The second integral, that one says Allahu Akbar whilst standing up. Okay, when he says whilst standing up, what he means is if you're able. If you're able to stand up, then you have to stand up for the opening takbir. Okay, if you're able to do so, you must stand up for the opening takbir, just like you must stand up for the beginning of every rak'ah if you're able to. Okay. So the opening takbir, when you say Allahu Akbar, you need to be standing while you say it if you're able to stand. I also want to remind you that the wording is Allahu Akbar. We talked about this a little bit when we talked about the adhan, right? Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Okay, a lot of people, they say it fast or try to say it quick or try to say it slick or whatever, and they end up putting a W in there. They say Allahu Akbar. They say Wekbar. Okay, it's not Allahu Akbar. It's Allahu Akbar. All right, put that in there. Allahu Akbar. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, says there's no harm if there is a short attribute of Allah mentioned. So if you were to add an attribute of Allah in the middle of this takbir, according to the Shafi'i school, this is still valid. If a person said Allahu Ta'ala Akbar by adding the word Ta'ala in the middle, this is still valid according to the Shafi'is. Or if a person said Allahu Azza wa Jalla Akbar, this is valid because adding Ta'ala or adding Azza wa Jal in the middle, it's short. It's short. It doesn't render it no longer a takbir. So therefore, according to the Shafi'is, you can do that. You can add something in the middle on the condition that it is short. Okay, and it's a description of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, you cannot add something long. Okay, it's not valid for you to start your salat saying Allahu alladhi la ilaha illa huwa al-malikul haqqu akbar. Okay, that's too much. That's too much of a thing that you inserted in there. Okay, if you do that, your salat will not begin because it needs to begin with a takbir. But if you say Allahu Ta'ala Akbar, this is valid. If you say Allahu Azza wa Jalla Akbar, this is valid. But I strongly encourage you not to do that. I encourage you not to add anything between the word Allah and the word Akbar. And that's because there are other madhabs which specify that the start of the prayer must be Allahu Akbar exactly. And so if you were to say Allahu Ta'ala Akbar, yes, it's valid according to the Shafi'is, but some of the people praying behind you might have to leave the salat if you do that. They might have to consider your salat to be invalid because according to their madhab, it would be invalid. Okay, safety always lies, or almost always lies, in you excusing yourself from matters of disagreement. Okay, everybody agrees that if you start your salat with Allahu Akbar, all of the scholars agree that that is acceptable and valid. As soon as you start getting cute and saying Allahu Ta'ala Akbar, now you went and put yourself in a situation where some of the scholars say what you did is not valid. Some of them say it's valid, but some say it's not. So you put yourself in the middle of a difference of scholarly opinion. And what's generally advisable is to remove yourself from situations like that. Perform your salat in a way that all of the scholars will agree that it's valid. And then you know you're safe. So I'm telling you here, because it's in the book, that yes, in the Shafi'i school, it's valid to add a short description of Allah in the middle of your takbir. But my advice to you is not to do that. That way you remain safe. You remain outside of the difference of opinion of the scholars. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, continues. He says, or a pause. Okay, it's also acceptable to put a pause in between the word Allah and the word Akbar as long as it's short. So if a person says Allahu Akbar, this is valid according to the Shafi'is. That small pause in the middle is not going to invalidate your salat. Okay, but if a person said Allahu Akbar, this would not be valid. Okay, because that's a long pause. But again, my advice to you is don't pause in the middle. Just say Allahu Akbar. Let's keep reading. He says, the one who is unable, meaning the person who is not able to say Allahu Akbar in Arabic, the person who can't get the pronunciation right, he's not able to say it. Maybe he's physically unable to say it because his tongue has been cut off. Okay? Or maybe he's someone who doesn't know Arabic. Okay? Maybe he's a new Shahada, for example, hasn't learned how to say Allahu Akbar yet. What does this person do? How does this person begin the salat? It says, the one who is unable says it in any language he knows. Okay? And this is like compulsory. This is obligatory. You have to start the salat by saying Allahu Akbar. Okay? If you're able to say it in Arabic correctly, you must say it in Arabic correctly. If you're not able to say it correctly in Arabic, then you translate it to whatever language you are able to say it correctly in. So an American, if they don't know how to say Allahu Akbar, they can start their salat by saying God is great, or God is greater, or God is greatest. Perhaps God is greatest would be the best translation, or perhaps God is greater. I'm not really a fan of God is great. Seems to me like that's an odd translation. So the one who is not able to say Allahu Akbar in Arabic, what does he do? He translates it. But what about this person? It says it is compulsory to learn to say this, even if, he says here, if one is on journey. No, that's not what the text is saying. He's saying it is compulsory to learn to say this, even if it requires a journey. The Arabic says, walau bis safar, like even if it's by means of travel, even if that's what's required for you to learn how to say Allahu Akbar, then you have a religious obligation to travel to learn it. Everyone who is a Muslim needs to learn how to say Allahu Akbar. And the only exception would be the person who's unable to do it. Okay, like a person whose tongue is cut off, they're not going to be able to say Allahu Akbar. Or like a person who is mentally challenged in such a way that he's not able to learn to say Allahu Akbar. Those people would be excused due to inability. Everybody else must learn how to say Allahu Akbar. Everybody else must learn how to say Allahu Akbar. And you can learn it from anyone who's able to teach you. Might be your neighbor, might be someone in your family, might be someone down at the masjid, might be the imam. There are certainly millions and millions of people who can teach you how to say Allahu Akbar. If you're not able to say it, you are religiously obligated to find out how to say it as quickly as possible. What I mean by that is until you learn how to say Allahu Akbar, you're allowed to translate it into a language that you're able to speak, but only, how do I say this? You're allowed to translate it for however long it would take you to learn how to say it properly, on the condition that you spent all of your time trying to learn it, every free moment you had. Obviously, you can still eat, you can still sleep, you can still go to the bathroom, you can still make your salats. Okay, you might need some time to look around and find someone to teach you. You might have to wait a while for that teacher to have time to sit down with you. All of those little gaps of you not working on it, those things are all excused because what can you do? Okay, but every possible moment for you to be studying, you have to purpose that moment towards learning how to say Allahu Akbar, as well as the other obligatory things to say in the salat, such as the Fatiha, the Tashahhud, the Salat ala Nabi, the Taslim at the end, Sallallahu wa sallam ala Muhammad. The things in the salat that you're required to say, you need to spend every moment, every free moment you have, learning to say it. Because let's say if a person spent every moment trying to learn Allahu Akbar, let's say it would take that person, a day to learn it, because they have to find a teacher and sit down with the teacher and repeat it until they get it right. Let's say it would take them a day if they spent every moment. But they decided to, put it off for a day. They decided to wait and look for a teacher the next day. What that means is they've now reached a point in time where if they had spent their time the way the religion requires, they would be saying Allahu Akbar in Arabic. But because they delayed for a day before they started learning it, they're still translating it on the second day. What's the ruling here? The ruling in this case is their salat is invalid. The salat that they're praying while translating, it's invalid because they had enough time to learn how to say it correctly and they wasted that time. Nonetheless, they're still obligated to perform those prayers in their times. So that second day, that person will be obligated to pray their salats while translating the takbir. They're going to be obligated to pray the salats. But then once they learn how to say the takbir, they're going to have to repeat the salats they prayed on that second day. They won't have to repeat the ones from the first day. Because the first day, he wouldn't have been able to say the takbir properly on the first day anyway, because for that person, it would take him a whole day to learn it. It's only the second day he would need to repeat, because that second day, he was still translating unnecessarily. If he had been on his deen and done what he was supposed to do, he wouldn't be translating on the second day. All right. He was late to be able to say it properly. Why? Because he wasted his time. He spent his time doing something that was not required by the religion. He watched TV or he went to the gym or something like that when he was supposed to be learning what the religion requires. This is called in Arabic taqsir, falling short. You did less than what's required of you. Okay, if you're falling short, then falling short is not excused. It's not excused. If you were able to learn it in a day, but you took 2 days, then guess what? The second day, you're going to have to repeat those prayers once you learn how to say the takbir correctly. If it took you a week, even though you could have learned it in a day, then those other 6 days, you're going to have to repeat them all once you learn how to say the takbir correctly. And of course, for most people, it will not take them a day to learn to say Allahu Akbar. In fact, Allahu Akbar, for the average person, I think it takes them minutes to learn it. Okay? So if you could have learned it in minutes, but you didn't learn it until an hour has passed, say you could have learned it within 3 minutes, but you waited and you learned it after an hour. Any salat that you prayed in between the 3-minute mark and when you learned it, you need to repray. That's how it works. Inshallah, that's clear. And look what it says, even if it requires a journey. So let's say that you looked and looked and looked, and there's nobody at all in your town or in your village that can teach you how to say Allahu Akbar. The closest person you found that can teach you lives a 4-hour drive away. Well, then religiously, you're obligated to drive those 4 hours and find that person and learn from him. If there's no other way. Inshallah, you can get his phone number and call him or something like that and avoid the travel. But the point is, if the only way for you to learn this is by traveling to learn it, well, then you're religiously obligated to travel to learn it. And this is true for all of the obligatory knowledge. If there's no one to teach it to you in town, then you must travel to learn it. It's really sad because there's so many people nowadays, they live in the city where there's tons of Muslims, including multiple people qualified to teach, and they haven't learned the obligatory knowledge. How many people still don't say the Fatiha correctly? They've been Muslim for 20, 30, 40 years, and they still don't say it correctly. Well, like I said, if they're unable to, like they physically are not able to do it, or mentally not able to do it, that's one thing. But if the only reason why they aren't saying it properly is because they haven't taken the time to practice and work on it until they can say it correctly, then that means they're falling short. And all the years of salats that they prayed while saying it incorrectly, once they learn how to say it correctly, they're going to have to repray all the years of salats that they prayed incorrectly in. And they would only be excused for the ones in the very beginning, the ones that even if they did use all their time correctly, they still wouldn't have learned it in that amount of time. Those ones they won't have to make up. All the others they will have to make up. Okay, this stuff is serious. All right, this deen is serious. This salat is serious. You need to learn how to do it correctly. There aren't a whole lot of things in the salat that you have to say. Okay? But those few things that you have to say, you must learn how to say them correctly. You must. And if you don't say them correctly, then you must try in all of your free time to say it correctly. You must learn it. Okay, don't think just because most of the people around you have a lackadaisical attitude toward this and they don't take it seriously and they don't really care if they're saying it right or not. Don't be deceived by people saying, oh, Allah knows my intention, as if it's okay for them to continue to do something improperly just because, according to them, they have a good intention. Although I don't really understand how it's a good intention for you to know you're doing something wrong but not care. I don't see what's the good intention about that. You know, Allah commands us to do these things for what reason? Worship. To worship Him. You don't think Allah deserves for you to give it your best? Of course Allah deserves for you to give it your best. Why are you purposefully not giving it your best? Why are you purposefully being lazy and not learning how to do things the right way? This is a major problem in a lot of our communities. People are too complacent. You know, they've accepted failure. And unfortunately, it's not even limited to the deen. You see people, they go to school and they don't even try. They go to work and they don't even try. They get fired. They don't understand why they're being fired. This is not the way. It's not the way to success in the deen. This is not the way to success on the day of judgment. And it's not even the way to success in the dunya. You know, as a buddy of mine once said to me, something he was taught by his father. His father used to say to him, you can do it right or you can do it twice. Meaning if you do it wrong, you have to do it over again. It's the same way in this deen. You can do it right or you can do it twice. If you're going to do it the wrong way, then guess what? You're going to have to repray those salats again. And trust me, I know people who have decades of salats to make up. Decades. You know, this is not a simple matter. Please exert all of your effort to learn these things correctly. What else does it say here? It says, and one may also, I want you to scratch out the word may also and put the word must there because you don't have a choice about this. It says, and one must delay the salat to learn saying Allahu Akbar. What does that mean? It means if you at the current moment are not able to say Allahu Akbar correctly, but you hope that you will be able to say it correctly before the prayer time goes out, well then in that case, you wait to make this salat until after you learn how to say it correctly. You get what I'm saying? You might be in the masjid. Maybe you just took shahada. You're in the masjid. And they're about now, right now, they're about to pray a big prayer with everybody there. Say Dhuhr, for example. Everybody's lining up to pray. You don't know how to say Allahu Akbar yet. Well, we said that you can translate it until you learn how to say it. But if you have hope that you will learn how to say Allahu Akbar before this prayer time is over, then you have to delay it. You don't join in with that group of people and you don't translate it. Instead, you spend your time, you learn it, and then you perform the prayer by saying Allahu Akbar correctly within the salat's time. Now, if the time starts to run out and you lose hope that you're going to learn it before the time goes out, then go ahead and pray by translating it. Because at that point, you know you're not falling short. At that point, you know you did everything you could. And you don't have hope of learning it within the time anymore. So just pray it within the time with translation. Okay, but you do this for every salat. As long as you have hope that you'll learn it correctly before the end of the time, you delay the prayer and you keep trying to learn it. And then you pray the salat either once you've learned how to say it correctly or once you've lost hope of learning how to say it correctly before the time goes out. The author, may Allah have mercy on him, continues. So we already said there's certain things that need to be true about this takbir. Okay, we mentioned that you need to be standing up while you say it, right? And we mentioned that you can't have a long gap in between the words Allah and Akbar, nor can you have a long amount of descriptions of Allah in between them. Okay, and we mentioned that these rules about saying it in Arabic and how you're allowed to translate it if you have an excuse, but your excuse only lasts for the amount of time it would take you to learn it if you spent all your time trying to learn it. Okay, taking any more than that to learn it means you fell short. He now says there is a condition that one, he says should, again, scratch out should and make it say must, because again, there's no choice here. There is a condition that one must make himself hear the takbir. Okay, so when you say your takbir with your tongue, you need to make sure you say it loudly enough that you can hear it with your own ear. You can hear your own voice with your own ear. You don't have to make it so loud that everybody hears you. You know, some people, they in the fourth or fifth row of the salat, and when they enter it, they sound like the imam making a takbir for everybody. They come in, Allahu Akbar. No, okay, you need to say your takbir loudly enough that you can hear yourself. But the person who's right next to you does not need to hear you. The person who's right next to you does not need to hear you. Okay, so don't make it so loud that a lot of people can hear you. Obviously, a lot of us, you know, our voices and things, maybe the people close to you will still hear it, but you're not trying to make them hear it. You're just trying to make yourself hear it. That's it, because you have to hear it. You have to say it loudly enough to make yourself hear it. Otherwise, it doesn't count as a takbir and your salat doesn't begin. It says, and similarly, all recitations and the rest of the verbal pillars. So actually everything that you're obligated to say in the salat, just the things obligated to say, not the things optional, but everything that you're obligated to say in the salat, it's a condition that you hear yourself say it. You have to hear yourself say it or else it's not valid. Unless you have an excuse. Okay, there are cases where you might not hear yourself and it's still valid. That would be like if you're in a noisy place. You know, say there's construction outside your house. You want to make a salat, but there's jackhammering and all this stuff. There's so much noise. Okay, you're not required to shout at the top of your lungs in order to make yourself hear yourself. No, if you're in a place that's noisy, what's required is for you to say Allahu Akbar at the normal volume that normally is enough for you to hear yourself. You don't have to raise your voice loud to make yourself hear yourself if you're in a noisy place. But if you're in like a place that's not noisy, a normal amount of noise, what's required for you to hear yourself? That's the way you have to say it in order for it to be valid. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. We'll pick up next time with the third pillar. Let me check my calendar real quick to make sure we're going to have class. Yes, we'll have class, inshallah, next week. I am going to be traveling a bit soon, so expect some cancellations coming up, but next week, inshallah, we'll have class on the 19th of June. If you have questions, please drop them in the box. I think I see a couple. So I'll get to them now, inshallah. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Someone said that when he first became Muslim, he would listen to like a recording of a person praying. So there's no harm if a recording or even a live person is prompting you what to say and how to say it, and then you repeat after them because you don't have it memorized. That's not a problem. That's perfectly valid as long as you're saying it correctly. Okay, the fact that you had to hear someone else say it first is not the issue. What matters is, did you say it correctly? Now, if you're saying that you don't even know if you pronounced it correctly, that's a separate issue. Then we have to go back to what we were saying earlier of, well, did you have enough time to learn it correctly, and so on. But it's acceptable in the Shafi'i school to have someone prompt you what to say, even if it's a recording. Just like it's acceptable in the Shafi'i school to read it. You can have it on the wall, something stuck on the wall, written out what to say and when, and you can be reading it while you're in salat. You could be holding a mushaf in your hand, reading it. If you're worried you won't remember a certain surah, you can hold it in your hand and read it, or even your phone. You got mushaf on your phone, you can read it. The Shafi'i school does not forbid these things. Someone said one can record his voice reciting the prayer to detect errors. That is something that might help a person. If they record their own voice and then listen to it, then they'll see what they really sound like. A lot of people who listen to recordings, especially of Quran, they think that they sound just like the recording. But if they recorded themselves, they'd realize how different they sound, or maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. The true answer, though, is you go to a teacher. You go to someone who's qualified and let them listen to how you say these things and affirm if you're saying it correctly or not. So if we're talking about Quran, you go to a Quran teacher, or at least someone who's qualified to teach what you're learning. Say, if you're still learning the Fatiha or some of the shorter surahs, there's probably a lot of people who can help you with those, as long as they know what they're talking about. Similarly, these other things that you say in the salat, not Quran, but things like Allahu Akbar, Assalamu alaikum, At-Tahiyyat, etc., these kinds of things. Typically, anyone who knows Arabic can help you with these things. But what's required is something called talaqi, that whoever you go to learn this from, they themselves have recited these things to a teacher and received confirmation that they're saying it correctly. Okay, then if they listen to you, they can correct you and tell you how to say it correctly. This is what matters in the end. This is what will make a person qualified for this work, that they have talaqi in it. They recited it to a teacher, and the teacher confirmed they're saying it correctly. Any other questions? I think that's all of them that I see here. Well, if there are no more questions, let's say La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. La ilaha illallah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات رب اغفر لي وللمؤمنين والمؤمنات. Barakallahu feekum. I'll see you next week, insha'Allah ta'ala. But the 2 Thursdays after that, I will be unavailable. But next week, the 19th, we will have class, insha'Allah ta'ala. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.